Today I'm not gonna give you any recipe, but little details of how to make your food amazing. These tips and sometimes some choices that we make, which makes our food taste incredibly great and sometimes not so great. Maybe you have cooked over the years the same recipe and even the ingredients that you use are almost same. The recipe don't come up the same. Sometimes it's your attitude, how you feel that day that really affects the food, and sometimes it's the pots and pans that you use, or temperature and the program of the oven that you use, or the knife that you cut. I have summarized these in 5 categories. Everything starts with the cutting and preparing. So, nice cutting board would do great. And second, it's the knife. When you hold your knife, it should feel as if it's a part of your arm. For example, if the knife is too big for you or too light for you, that doesn't work. It has to be in such a harmony that it should work with you. Secondly, the knife that you choose. It could be a classical chef's knife like this. This is more like if you do mince a lot. This is my Turkish chef knives that I have designed. It's better in mincing, it's better in carving, etc. Or it could be if you're like more from Asian side, you like sushi kind of things, you like thin slices to preciseness, or a more santoku like knife could do. For example, these chef knives are more like professional knives, and these professional looking knives are better in professional guys, but if the sizes were a little smaller, I believe the home cooks cook much better with it. So the only brand that I know that makes like smaller chef knives is IKEA. You can find some really good knives, but if you like mincing and if you like our food, this is the knife that I have designed over the years and I feel really good with it, and you can go to that. What kind of knives that you want to use? You can have like 10, 15 different types of knives in the kitchen, but 3 knives are really important. The first one is the chef's knife. The second one is like, this is called the bread knife, but the knife with have these little cutting marks. This helps you to cut bread, or you can use it in cutting a birthday cake, for example, or sometimes even big like tomatoes or something. If it's like watery inside and hard outside, these things help you to cut. And the third one is a paring knife. It could be a longer one like this if you're comfortable, or a shorter one like this if you're like small knives. You can peel, pare, anything. Another thing that I use is a peeler. Peeler is not a knife, but it works in miracles in doing so many things. For example, if you have a potato and you want to peel the outsides, or it could work as a grater if you have want to make a, let's say, courgette spaghetti, you can do it with these. These work in miracles. If you peel your potatoes with this one instead of this one, some more potatoes are thrown out. So this also saves some food as well in that terms. And the second thing which is very important is, as I said, there are almost same size knives that are sold for $2 from China or somewhere. And sometimes we give $100, $50 to a knife. What's the difference? It's the quality of the steel. The quality of the steel is very important in terms of its duration, first of all. When the steel is not so good, the knife gets dull very fast. You cut for 30 minutes and then suddenly you're not very happy with the way it cuts. So you have to sharpen it again, and the more you sharpen it, it goes bad, etc, etc. The other thing is, for example, some of the knives that you buy from a supermarket, let's say, they're usually cheap. They get rusted really fast, and rust is not so good for many reasons. You have to throw away the knife basically. So these are the basic things. Let's move to choosing a pan. This is a really important thing. When you open a cupboard, there are different types of pans that you have bought over the years, but usually you go to 1 or 2 of the pans that you use. But actually, each pan in each different recipe might have a role. And the basic rule that you should keep in mind is, actually you can divide the pans into 2 categories. The main category is, some of them are like a sea, some of them is like the land. The sea is like harder to get warm and keeps warm for a long time. These are pans like cast iron, clay, stainless steel, which is thick at the bottom, Some pans are like the land, which they get hot very easily and they get cold very easily. Copper,
Aluminium.
enamelware, aluminium. Bravo. We don't like using aluminium in the old days in Turkey. We had lots of aluminium, but aluminium is very soft. So you can have scars in it, and when you have scars, that scar means you ate some aluminium. We have this main difference, and this main difference is the reason why you should sometimes choose a cast iron or a copper one or a steel one. In the old days, some animal or someone had a big scar. They would heat an iron thing, and then when it's like really red, they would put it on the scar, and then it will burn, but it will also make the two skins stick. This is what is needed when you're cooking some meat. That same thing happens on the cast iron. Put it onto a very hot pan, and then it gets sealed, and the water inside the meat stays inside and moist. That's like the basic thing. So we need something really hot there, and it shouldn't get cold. Or when you're making an egg wants a high heat, but egg gets cooked very fast. So you put an egg and you say, oh, it's almost done. By the time you take it to your plate, it might overcook. If it's a cast iron pan, that is gonna happen. But if it's a copper pan, you can cook it immediately and then even bring it to the table with that. That would happen in copper. That will also happen in enamelware.
Question. What if I put my meat in a copper pan?
That's a great question. As you can see, copper inside has a thin coating. And this thin coating in high heat starts to melt. So if you want to make this meat on a copper pan, if it's a thick meat, let's say, you turn the heat big and then you put the meat in the middle. You keep the heat so high, it's a good conductor, so it still gets hot. But what happens is outside, because on the places where there's no meat touching to the pan, the sides of the pan are gonna burn. It will change color, the tint might melt. But what you can do if it's a very thin meat, that's something we did in mıhlanmış et, for example, you just put and seal it and then turn it and then it's done, then you can use it there. Also, another thing, for example, if you're gonna cook mushrooms is almost water itself. So if you put it to a pan, which is easily gets hot and easily gets cold, usually heat the pan, but you put the mushrooms in and then the heat of the stove is not enough, then it will give away some water. To prevent that, you can do two things. Either you can use a cast iron, or if you don't have a cast iron, you'll have the biggest pan that you have, and you don't overcrowd the pan, and you use the biggest eye of the stove. That's how you're gonna manage it. The worst thing that happens while cooking some meat, for example, is the heat is not enough, the pan is not hot enough. You put the meat and it doesn't get sealed. What happens? It just takes the juices out. Then the juices, it's not gonna like fry on the pan, but it's gonna first boil in its own water, and after the water evaporates, it's gonna start to brown. We like the Maillard reaction, which is browning reaction, which gives the taste. The difference from the sealed meat is gonna be, because it gives out its water away, it might look similar, but it's much drier meat when you eat it.
And chewier.
And chewier, of course. You might say the non-sticks and the steel. When you have like, this could be one kind of steel pan, at the bottom it has to be thick. The thicker, the better, because it's gonna be more like a cast iron one. Secondly, the size of the pan. If you have veggies like courgettes, mushrooms, etc., which give away a lot of water, the pan has to be big and it shouldn't be crowded. But sometimes they say you're cooking and just one egg and use this pan. What happens? Only the egg stays here and the sides are gonna burn. We don't want that. It's gonna be harder to clean and it's not gonna be even. So look at the food that you're gonna prepare and look at the size of the pan and decide accordingly. And also the non-sticks. I'm very against Teflon. If you are a non-stick fan, please use ceramics. They're slightly better. And when you're using any kind of pans, know that like in ceramic and steel pans, they are not gonna get into a very high heat like cast iron. The reason is these coatings are around 220 degrees Celsius to 260 degrees Celsius. When it gets over it, some chemical gases starts to evaporate, and that's very unhealthy. Let's say if you're roasting nuts, never ever use a non-stick. use a steel in that sense, or if you have cast iron, even better. Because unfortunately, the steel became very expensive in the world, so that they are making new combinations, 304, 306, so many types of steel have come, and some of these steel, when they get into high heat, similar to the non-stick, starts to have gases which are unhealthy. But the types are so much that it's really almost impossible to say this is healthy, this is unhealthy. So it's a real stomach aching issue. When you're buying a steel pan, buy really from a brand that you really trust. Finally, for example, if you're making fish, what you do, you have a nice fillet. Making a perfect fillet comes from like putting some oil on the pan and then put fillet of fish skin down, and the skin starts to get crispy on the stove, and then you put it in the oven for the top to also cook for about 2 to 3 minutes. But if you choose a pan like this, you won't be able to put it in the oven because this is plastic. When you're buying a pan, it's gonna be like $10–15 difference, but the difference pays in such things. Always try to buy a steel handle and also use as little plastic as possible if you can. These are some of the things that you must think about while choosing your pan. Another thing which helps us in the kitchen to make everything faster is gonna be our food processor, big or small, or the blender ones. These are 3 things that you can use. When you choose these, what are the most important things that you should take into consideration is, there are 4 things. First off is the size. If you are a family, a big one, or if you're a big hummus lover, you should have one of these food processors at hand. And these food processors, they used to be just 1 knives. Now it's 2 knives, like totally it becomes 4 knives like this. How these things work is very important. What it does, the container, it kind of squeezes everything, and then on the corner that it squeezes, it chops. So if you just put 1 onion to this, it's gonna cannot squeeze it into a corner or something. So it will fly around, it will chop some of very much and won't chop some parts. So you should use a smaller one. The size and what you're gonna chop is very important. And for example, the power, this is 2000 watts, and some of them are just 1000. There are ones which are like only 700 watts. The watts is a little bit more energy, but it's more powerful, so that the creaminess, for example, if you're going to make a hummus and you're going to make a creamy one, you want a better powered one so that it makes it creamier faster. Secondly, for example, when you use the small ones, this has 2 knives and this has 1 knife, and this 1 knife usually don't work in miracles. Let's say you want to make a pizza sauce, you put like 2 garlics, a bit of tomato juice, some other things inside. This can make it into a puree. This is not gonna do it very well. So these are like, usually when you buy a blender, this thing comes with it, but this is not a replacement for this small thing. And this is one of my old and very much used little processor, but the outside is plastic. As you can see, it becomes foggy, and the fogginess means it has scars. That scars means you have some plastic get into the food that you are preparing. Instead of that, you can use glass. It's much better. Unfortunately, in Turkey, you don't have any glass food processors that are made in Turkey, but some few brands make these glass, and at home, for example, I use that one. We want to, let's say, like chopping an onion or chopping some parsley for a recipe. What happens is, if you just like go on and make it start working for a long time, usually some onion might stuck somewhere. Instead, what you do is you use it on a pulse. When you use it on a pulse, it becomes like you're chopping a knife. It works that way. 10 years ago, if we were having the same conversation, I would say don't chop your onions in these food processors. But after 10 years, the knives are better, the housing, the system is much better, so you can use these from now on.
What happens if I turn it on and leave it like that?
Onions at the bottom becomes like a puree and the water gets out, and the ones at the top, they are going to be roughly chopped. That's basically the 2 things that is like the pulse is better, and sometimes you open it, usually Burak does it really well, twist it with your hand and then go and do some more pulse and it becomes like hand chop. For example, for a recipe, you want parsley and onions. Don't put the parsley and onions at the same time. Put the onions, have a few pulse and roughly chop it, and then divide the parsley in your hands in several ways and then chop it. One more thing I forgot to tell. Just don't put the onions directly. Chop them in like 4 pieces so that it's easy for the knives to get around. So that's gonna be better as well. So these are the things that are like using a processor. It might be a negligible thing, but it makes a difference when you do the cooking, because if the water of the onion, let's say, gets out, if you're gonna make a recipe on the pan, onion juice starts to evaporate instead of getting into the food. Like first it has to fry outside like the meat, and the juice should stay inside, and while, let's say it's a stew, it's cooking slowly, the juice should get out and then it become a taste. But if the juice directly gets out, you don't get that taste, and the taste at least drops 20 to 30%. So these are the basic things while using a little processor in your kitchen. Which eye of the stove to use? That's a decision that when we are cooking, we make sometimes without even thinking. In usually the food that we prepare, the first moment that we put the thing on fire, usually we need the high heat. So we start with a higher one, and then usually for the balance inside of the food to cook, we need a lower heat. So for example, if I have a stir fry, what I do is I turn on the biggest heat because it's gonna be stir fry and I want to fry. I'm gonna stay on the high heat from the start to the end. But if I'm gonna make a pilaf, a rice, what I have to do, first I turn on the heat, I put the rice and I fry it a bit, and then I put the water, and then it should stay for a while to cook. If it's like this big of a pan, this is too big, I put it on a smaller heat and reduce the heat. Take it to the smallest one, like this, and put it. What is the difference? When you have the smallest heat, it's just this big. So the bottom of the pan will not get heated, but in a bigger eye, it will be heated totally from the bottom, so on a lower heat. Instead of making the smallest eye work on the highest, I put it on the medium, also to the medium heat, so that it will be balanced. And in some food, we don't want to heat it directly but immediately. For example, if you want to fry an egg, you put some butter. And butter, what does butter have?
Milk particles.
Milk particles, some solid particles, and also milk. The burning point of those solid particles are quite low. So if I turn on a high heat and I put a lump of butter, it starts to melt around, but by the time the rest of the lump gets heated, the ones which are first melted starts to go brown. If it burns a little, it has this nutty caramelly flavor. If it burns too much, the bitterness gets out, the taste changes dramatically. So we don't like that. So what we have to do, we put it on low heat, put the pan, we start to warm the pan, and we put the butter, and we make it some turn so that before it starts to bubble, all of the butter should be melted. This is similar for when you make a syrup or sugary things. Put sugar and water and you start to whisk. If the water starts to boil before the sugar totally melts, what happens?
It's crystallized.
It starts to crystallize, and we don't want that as well. Sometimes we start with a lower heat and then maybe continue on a higher one, but usually high to low. So these are the small things. And the size, for example, if my pan is like this and I put it on the big wok, what happens is the sides are gonna burn because the heat is too much and the sides are gonna burn. We're gonna end up with a burned pan. And as we said, these, like if it's a non-stick one, some bad vapor starts to come. This is also some of the things that we should care when we choose our stove. The same thing what happens to the stove, also similar in the oven as well. Oven is a big box that we pay a lot of money, and usually people just use 1 or 2 things but don't know exactly what to use. For example, here we have some different signs. The first one, the one with the wiggly thing at the top, is the grill. The lines top and bottom heated and nothing more. If there's a fan in the middle like this, it says there's also a fan. And if there is also a circle around the fan, it means in the middle of this oven there's also another heater around the fan, and when also that works, it becomes, some of them call it a turbo. So top, bottom, and the middle works, and the fan works, so that inside is like, it's almost like an air fryer. Air is going around. So why and when we are gonna use these. I'm gonna cook something in the oven and I forgot to turn on the oven. Usually what happens to me. So, and I just have 5 minutes, and after 5 minutes I want to use the oven. And it's very important, just like the stove, whatever we put in, for it to not to like lose its water, it has to be hot. So we should put it in top, bottom, and also fan and the heater around the fan it gets, and I put it into maximum and make it work for 5 minutes, and then my oven is gonna be hot, and then I can choose either a grill or top, bottom, whatever we want to use, whatever we need to do that. So instead of like turning the oven half an hour ago and making it heat for a long time, this is something that you can use. This is the easiest way the oven gets hot into 200-250 degrees Celsius. And the grill, using the grill. Oven is a great thing, you know how to use the grill. If you want to make a meat, if you want to have roast vegetables, if you want to use the oven like a fryer, grill is gonna be our greatest friend. Let's say, start with from the simplest. You want to roast a bread. You shouldn't use a tray, but you should use a wire rack. Why?
Because the bread has to breathe.
Bravo, the bread has to breathe because there's moist inside, and you toast the bread. You have to take the moist outside and you have to make it crunchy outside as well. So turn on the grill and I put my bread here, and if it was on a normal tray, what happens is, like, you know, some pajamas and running sweats which make you lose weight, like sweatpants. What they do, the tray is gonna work like those sweatpants. It's gonna sweat from the bottom, top will be crunchy, and at the bottom it's gonna be soggy. So we have to turn it. But when you make it into a rack, it's much better. Same thing while you cook a meat. If you want to make a, let's say, kebab or a köfte, meatball, you put it there, and at the bottom maybe a tray for the dripping of the oil and juices as well. If it's closer to the heat, it's better because it's gonna be like work as the high heat on the stove, so it's very important. Secondly, if you want to make a cake or a souffle, one thing you should avoid is gonna be the fan. Fan is, think of it like you're on near a seaside and the wind is blowing. And what happens when the wind blows? You get out of the sea and you get dry faster. And if you want the moistness, if you want the thing, we don't want a dry cake which is boring. We want a soggy cake which is nice, and if we want it to get big, like if it's a bread, put it on sleep for a while, and so it has a lot of air bubbles inside, and when we put it on the stove, the air bubbles get warm, get bigger and get nice. But if there's a wind like that which is hitting, slapping in the face, it's gonna be not so good. So in those kind of things, we don't want any extra move of weather inside, so top and bottom is just enough. Or another thing, while we make a pizza, if you want to make a lahmacun or a pide kind of thing, what we should do is we're gonna use two different ovens at the same time. At the bottom, it's the hottest because underneath this enamelware, there is resistance. So I want it as it seals like the cast iron sealing. For example, I put my pizza at the bottom, make the bottom really crunchy, and let's say if it's a thin one, 8 minutes. And then what happens is the bottom will be cooked, but the top is gonna be not cooked so much. So I'll look at the bottom. If it's crunchy and looks nice, I take it up and put it on the top level with the grill. So the grill is gonna melt the cheese. If there's a meat, it will cook the meat and it will balance it, and you're gonna be able to get a great pizza in 15 minutes really easily. And plus, if you're gonna make a two pizza, you have, like, after you move the first one on top, you can start to do the second one immediately. So you enlarge the oven in a way. If you haven't used this technique while you're making a pizza, use it because it's really good and kind of my technique. Another question that Tuğçe asked, Refika, if I'm cooking something, let's say nice poğaça, we have a great recipe here, there's the second tray in the oven. And I always think whether I should take it off or not. The answer is definitely you should take it off, because what happens is, as I said, the heat is from top and the bottom. So if we put a tray, it's gonna imbalance the heat of the oven. So the heat from the bottom will not be able to come up easily. The fan might be needed, and if the fan gets into the picture, then it's gonna dry. So put it in the middle, and there shouldn't be anything extra in the oven to take the heat and flow to a different place. So this is also very important. And You might also say another thing is, Refika, I usually put my pizza in the middle and I cook it that way. Your pizza in the middle will be cooked, but what will happen is the bottom will not be as crunchy as you wish. The water of the tomato juice and etc. is gonna evaporate and it's gonna be drier for the dough and drier for the toppings. And it's gonna be a drier, less tasty pizza. Simple other thing, if you want to dry some things, you put it onto a not so high heat. When we want to dry, same as the blow dry near the sea, you want a fan. Turn on the fan and let it work for a while. It will work in miracles and you can dry, let's say, oranges, meat, a lot of things in your ordinary oven so easily. So these are several things that I wanted to tell about the oven and how it works. For example, if you want to make chips, kind of like potato chips which are crunchy, looks nice, what you should do?
Turn everything on.
Turn everything on. Grill, it has to be higher on the grill so that the crispiness, niceness is going to be on top. But also we need the fan for it to dry and make it crispier. So with this idea, why the fan is there, why the grill is there, you might look at the things that you do in your recipes better and you can decide which one to use much easily. So hope it's helpful, hope you like the content. If you have liked the content, you know what to do. You press like, and also if you have a little note, you can leave a comment. All the comments we read, we don't skip anyone, and all those things. Usually it's a Saturday and I start to read, and Sunday. My Saturdays and Sundays are with you guys and it's very valuable for me and also for the team. We share some great comments within our group as well. It's what keeps us going. So basically that's it. If you haven't subscribed, you must, because this information you cannot find anywhere like this. So take care.